ich dir noch angesäche, so bist du ihr aller Ehre. Was ist Wundes hier geschäche? Dass ein Magd ein Kind gebar, ihre über aller Engel Schar. Was das nicht ein Wunder gab.
This is The New Right, a podcast for the lost arts, reclaiming the literary Holy Land from the heathen. This is Matt Pegas.
And this is Dan Baltic.
And we are here today with a filmmaker, Josiah McGarvey. I'm saying your last name correctly?
Yeah, perfect, yeah.
Good. I always make sure, because you never know. But Josiah is, he directed a very, very good, very sharp documentary about 4chan, about the sort of what actually Nick Fuentes in the documentary calls the apogee of the meme war, the "He Will Not Divide Us" incident, in which 4chan trolls trolled none other than Shia LaBeouf. Josiah has made a very good, very entertaining, very informative, frankly, documentary about this mimetic event that was not given the proper coverage by the mainstream media for obvious reasons, but which I think Dan and I both really do think is a highly relevant, bit of cultural and in certain ways political history from early 2017. It's a really good documentary. Dividers. We'll tell you all about how you can watch it later on, but first of all, Josiah, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It's great to have you on, man.
Very, very good. Josiah joins us from Australia, and as we were just discussing, it's definitely probably one of our furthest out guests we've had on. We are recording this spanning continents and spanning time zones, spanning days, in fact. It's Sunday for Dan and I, Monday for Josiah, but we all are coming together to do this. It's very cool. I guess I'll back up a step. I actually came across this movie. Are you familiar? I assume you've had some dialogue with him, with Hadrian Belov here in LA.
Yeah, I'm familiar with Hadrian. Yeah,
he is known. There's a whole history with Hadrian that we don't need to get into, but his sort of former career was filming sort of odd and out there movies, and he has continued to do this. And I actually caught one of his screenings of this documentary, I think when it was very, very new, when it had just been released in some kind of way. Since then, I think it kind of was taken down and then you re-put it up. We'll get into that later. But I saw it back in November, in person at a screening. I have a bit of a story related to it, which is has some entertainment value to it, I think.
I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, no, because it is related to your documentary a little bit. So, well, not to the content, but it's a unique screening experience. Hadrian screened this in a sort of warehouse that has been reappropriated for other purposes in downtown LA, kind of near where things get a bit sketchy. And this was day after Halloween, kind of weird vibes in the air. And I go there, park my car on the street, go in, watch the movie, love it, meet a lot of cool people, really enjoy the movie. And I go out, and my car is gone. And I think that, at first I assume that it's been towed, but it doesn't match up. And I talked to Hadrian and others at this screening, and lo and behold, they're like, "It sounds like your car got stolen, man." And that is in fact what happened. My car was stolen during this screening of Dividers.
Matt was divided from his car.
I was divided from my car.
He got divided.
But it wasn't 4chan. It was, I guess there's a trend online. Well, it's not 4chan, but it's a little bit similar to that kind of vibe. It was there's some trend online where people steal cars and record themselves driving them around like maniacs. And I kind of realized pretty soon after filing the police report that this is probably what had happened. Wasn't expecting to see the car again, but I got it back in one piece 2 days later, so it does have a happy ending.
Wow, that's awesome. You got trolled in real life. That's real life trolling.
Absolutely. A bit of a chaotic event. But during the time that I didn't have my car and that I got it back, I did send you a DM, Josiah, and say we should get you on New Right. Loved your doc. Want to talk about it. And you basically said, let's do it down the line. I want to talk about the content that we could get into sort of the distribution and why you've released it, how you've released it, and when it's going to be more widely available. But yeah, we did kind of set this up from early on, and you reached out to me a couple weeks ago and said the time had come to promote. So we're very glad to have you.
Yeah. Well, I'm happy to be here. Yeah, it's been a long time coming.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if this is ass backward way to start, but I guess we could talk a little bit about. So you at that time, when I first DM'd, you said that you'd love to come on the pod, but you were kind of looking for a bigger distributor for Dividers. Is that still sort of in the works? Yeah.
It was. It's not the most interesting story, but basically, like, I don't. I've got a filmmaking background. I've done documentaries and that sort of thing. That's sort of my expertise, and I'd never done one sort of independently distributed and that sort of thing. So I thought, you know what, I'll make this documentary. I'll put all the effort into making the best like version of the story that I can, and then just put it out on a website. Set up a Shopify. Just my own website. Set up a Shopify or whatever, and then see if there's any interest, basically. And within a week of putting it out, some people had started to reach out to me. Hadrian was one of them. Very cool. He was, he was very cool. He said, "Hey, this is a great documentary. I can." He offered to sort of help get me in contact with some people, and he said basically, look, it's only been up for a very short period of time. You want to take it down to make it more desirable for distributors. So I talked to a few, had a few conversations, and eventually I got help distributing with a company called Movies Plus. They're like a Netflix alternative. You may have heard of them. They got some cool documentaries on their platform. They're one of these alternative platforms. Yeah. And so they like, hey, we'll do a distribution deal with you. We'll put it on our platform. We'll help you get it on Amazon. It just came out on Amazon. So it was on Movies Plus for a little while. Nice. It's now on Amazon. Hopefully it'll be on iTunes and maybe what's the other one? Google Play. Yeah. So Google Play, yeah. Yeah. So that's the story there. It was up for a little while and then it was down and it's up again. Yeah.
Well, no, it is interesting to how these things end up getting distributed, and is there a thought that that the Netflix is the Hulu? I mean, obviously you have to be kind of big to get on their radar, but is there a thought that maybe some of these bigger distributors would also avoid it for political reasons, or?
Oh yeah, totally. Like the when you reached out to me, I think I don't want to misrepresent your views or anything, but my impression was you felt like it was a pretty fair representation of the whole event, and so and I tried to do that as well. I wanted to be fair. I wanted to be sort of an honest representation. But there's certain subjects that you can't make an honest representation of. Exactly. A story if you want to get it anywhere mainstream, and even I think an honest representation of this story would be too edgy for a lot of even political like right wing political
like conservative people
exactly because like Sam Hyde's in it. And he's an edgy political figure. Nick Fuentes is in it. He's too edgy for a lot of people, and so even just talking like Nick Fuentes doesn't go into anything political in the documentary. He was there at the live stream, but even just portraying Nick Fuentes in a neutral way and getting his story as a witness is too controversial. It's too
exactly.
I think from most people, it's seen as too political. It's a political message in and of itself to give these guys a fair representation or a neutral representation.
Yeah. But adding to that, I mean, you do, and I could see the criticism a little more, I guess, if it was only Nick and Sam who were interviewed. But you interview, like, the person who was kind of on the other side quite extensively. I don't remember the guy's name off the top of my head. I wish I did, honestly. Because, it
was Paperboy Prince.
Paperboy Prince.
Like that.
No, he gives a great interview. He gives a great perspective on it.
I think this is doxable, but I'm in New York City, and I'm pretty sure he wound up running for office for like
Yes.
city council or something.
He ran for
'Cause
mayor
I remember,
of New York City.
mayor. Yeah, maybe it was mayor.
Yeah.
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 As I saw like this guy on the ballot, I'm like, paper boyfriend, what the fuck?
Yeah.
And yeah, now I know who he is.
Yeah, no. I'll get into this more, but I really do think that it is fair. Like, I think that you are sympathetic to the 4chaners far more than one is supposed to be in polite society.
Yeah.
And yeah, as you said, you can't really even have a straightforward interview with Nick Fuentes. That's also forbidden. But nevertheless, I do just think it's a very well-made documentary in terms of getting different angles on it. And also, I just think, frankly, the subject matter, think what you want about Trump and about 4chan and about that period in history. I just think this stuff does matter. Like, the influence that a certain social media platform, being 4chan, had on the culture at a certain point, and it doesn't any longer. But you would think that even if you were very much of the left or just very much of the mainstream, like, oh, this stuff is very bad, like populists online should not be able to do this kind of thing. You'd think even if that was your take, like that there is a value in kind of seeing the way this worked, and especially we'll talk about the capture the flag sort of sequence, just seeing how quick all that came together. So it's almost scientifically interesting. So any doubt or anyone who may want to avoid this doc for political reasons, I would really encourage to see it from that angle, that like this stuff happened and it does matter. It matters, and it matters more. It matters for reasons beyond just that. Oh, it hurt people's feelings. Like it was an event. Yeah. It's
I think the way to understand the perspective here is when you're like talking about being biased or coming from a certain bias, like I think everyone should realize this. There's a concept that I've been really fascinated with for a long time, and whenever a new documentary comes out about some subject, generally speaking, like you meet up with your friend at the bar, and he'll go, they made a documentary about He Will Not Divide Us, or they made a documentary about this subject or that subject, and the way that they present it is they say they made a documentary, and the implication is that the whoever had the most unbiased, knowledgeable perspective on the subject, who has like the final word, like the universe decided who was the best person for the job.
The Ministry of Truth is almost
exactly,
the subtext.
Yeah, exactly,
yeah.
And so and the reality, and people, I think it's, I'm not sure why. Maybe I wonder if you would agree with this, but I think people have a tendency to believe, like you read the news, and I think people depending on the news source, people are much more like switched on that this news has this bias and this news has this bias and old news has different biases and all this. But when it comes to documentaries, I think people don't make that connection, and they don't realize that people who make documentaries are totally biased more than news companies and all this sort of thing. And I think like for me, coming from this, like I tried to make it unbiased, but you have to be, you got to be naive to think
everyone has a point of view,
Exactly, yeah, exactly. Everyone has a point of view, and there's some famous quote that's like a point of view. I forget what the quote is, but it's basically a point of view is a point of view infers that there's a viewing point,
Right.
So where you're coming from is very important, and where I was coming from was, this is a funny story, this is like tomfoolery. Yeah. This is like really rude, offensive. Like, yes, there's a lot of offensive jokes, but this is like young people, young men in particular, who are really like pranksters, tricksters, and trolls, and all this sort of thing. And there's not a whole lot of genuine hate coming from these guys.
I really do think that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just like kids mucking around, basically. And I knew that, and that's my bias. My bias is I think this is a funny story. So, yeah. But I knew that.
Interesting.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. What's interesting to me is that your documentary, is actually probably more unbiased than the ones that they make, which are purportedly unbiased.
Yes.
And for that very reason, it's it is more likely to be censored, more like where we're discussing right now that Netflix, the Netflixes of the world, would be less likely to screen it. And it seems to me that certain books, certain documentaries, like we were talking about TFW, No GF, Kill All Normies, the book comes to mind by Angela Nagle. And these are not right-wing movies or books. Like Angela Nagle is, I think it was printed by Zero Press, which is very much a left-wing press. And but regardless, to kind of like treat this subject matter even-handedly, you just run afoul of the current censorious environment, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. And and it shows basically, when you know, like no one could possibly think that Netflix would take this film. Like it's just like no one would ever consider, hey, maybe Netflix would want to take this film because it's because everyone understands the cultural climate, and they go, well, this isn't acceptable in the current culture. The current mainstream culture is just not acceptable. So that's just how it is. So.
Like the only Netflix documentaries that I can think of about right-wing stuff are called Days of Hate or something, or something like really polemical, like we're going to show you the worst people on the planet. So any departure from that is just too incendiary, I suppose.
I mean, I like to think things may be changing, but I think realistically they're not, or not yet. And especially with with fiction, with feature films and TV, we talk about White Lotus as having some interesting themes. You can kind of slip in stuff, but with a documentary, I think there's more of a rejection out of hand because it's considered part of news and it's considered biased news or something of that nature. But,
yeah, totally. And like Netflix I would have had a shot at Netflix theoretically if it had been a documentary about how Nazi teenagers organize on 4chan to terrorize Hollywood celebrity artists. If you took that angle, people would be like, okay, let's take a look at this. Maybe we'll put this on Netflix.
Somber documentary with.
You would have had to have called it The Protectors or something, and made it about Shia's great, lost cause to unite us, which they sadly shattered.
And Luke Turner would perhaps be the main voice.
Exactly.
But to back up a step, I was going to ask, you sort of talked about how you found this to be a funny story, but I am curious kind of how you got into this subject matter. How did you discover this story? Were you on 4chan? You can deflect, but I'm curious.
No, I didn't really get onto 4chan. I started going on 4chan when I started researching the documentary, and I wanted to sort of, I knew about it, and I knew sort of what was going on there, but I think, like a lot of people, do you know the Internet Historian, big YouTuber, the Internet Historian?
No, but I like that kind of thing a lot, so I will look that channel.
You would like it. It's a really big YouTube channel, and this guy, the Internet Historian, he breaks down he does a lot of 4chan stories and breaks down, and I think his most famous video was sort of 10-minute, 20-minute breakdown of the story of the He Will Not Divide Us trolling and the capture the flag.
One of the most significant influences from 4chan, probably, right?
Yeah, I think it is. I think it's the most famous trolling story. And I remember when it went viral in 2017, it started happening. Shia was doing all these kooky art things, and people were like, "Wow, this guy, what's he up to? He's got the bag on his head. I'm not famous anymore. He's watching all these movies in the movie theater." So I was aware of it, and then this 4chan thing happened, the 4chan trolling thing. And it was just the most viral, insane story I had ever heard. I couldn't believe it's like a real story. And
I know, yeah.
Yeah, it's just mind-blowing what happened. And I learned all the details, the overview from the Internet Historian. And that was I think that his video came out very soon after it all happened in 2017. And I thought for years, wow, this is just an amazing story. Wouldn't it be amazing if someone made a documentary about it? And as the years went on, I thought, you know what? Someone's going to do it. Someone's going to make a documentary on it. It's a viral story. And I had a feeling that it was a little bit of a protected project, like a protected story, because it's got an edge to it. I think people didn't want to touch it. Anyone who was sort of in the mainstream was afraid to touch it because of how edgy it was and controversial. And I thought, that's not going to last forever. Someone's going to make a documentary on it, and it's going to be what we talked about. It's going to be this somber, like moody, like Nazis chasing Shia LaBeouf around and how horrible and all this, and the humor would be totally lost. Like there would be no sense of humor. And I thought, I'm going to make this. And I also thought the trolls. No one had spoken to the trolls. Well, actually, some insider information. Yeah. There was some people who were interviewed by BuzzFeed and Vice and that sort of thing, and they canned the story. Like the milkman, he was interviewed by Vice. There was other guys who were interviewed by BuzzFeed, and they sort of didn't publish the stories because it didn't fit what they
realized
wanted
it wasn't going to fit what they wanted. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the
so
version
I thought,
they want is go on. Sorry.
all good. So I just thought, I'll make it, and I'll make it funny. And that'll be my angle, try and find the trolls and let them speak for themselves rather than being totally demonized. Like if you look up anything, all the mainstream that covers it is just like these troll demons from hell, starting to sound like Jordan Peterson.
yeah, exactly. Basically the Luke Turner version where you see that picture of the Nazis on the boat at the end. It's all that. We're glad there's an alternative take out there. I was going to ask about, how you kind of track some of these people down to interview, because it is it is the trolls. And I think one thing that you do, one element of the objectivity of it is you really see that a lot of the trolls are, they're not even all like white guys or something. Like it's a very unique mix of people who probably came to it for very different reasons, but fundamentally all there because it was funny. And sort of as Fuentes says, a lot of them are probably politically libertarian or possibly even somewhat lefty, if anything. Lots of lefties. You see that, in the documentary. The plaid man, what's his name? Plaid man. There's almost like a, I hate this word, but there's like a sort of hip element to it where these people are just like cool and chill people to hang out with. So it's them, but it's also, like that college kid who went and was on shrooms or whatever. And, what was his name? Paperboy. Yeah, it's everyone who was involved except, of course, Shia and Luke Turner, which we'll get into. But I'm curious if any of these people were hard to track down, or did you just kind of keep reaching out?
Yeah, very hard to track down. I got a few people, as you mentioned, there was a few people who were pro Shia LaBeouf, pro the installation. They were there, like Paperboy and Sean Malia, the college kid who was on shrooms, and who was the other guy, Rainbow Joe. But mostly the people who were pro didn't want to talk. And so it ended up being like the angle I took was like, let's tell the story from the perspective of the trolls. That was mostly the people I interviewed. But yeah, very hard to track them down, very hard. It took a few months to track them down. And basically what happened was I would just watch all the footage, because sometimes people would dox themselves or give an account, and it might be a burner account, but then maybe you could link it to something else. And and there was one guy who I was able to find a real email address for one of the trolls through some information he gave out. And I reached out to him, and I had to get on a phone call with pretty much everyone and say, look, because because of how the media has treated the whole thing, they were very skeptical. Am I going to come in and be like, hey, so cool, you're like a cool troll guy, do an interview with me? And
that's probably how BuzzFeed approached too. That's kind of lying journalist way, but
Exactly, yeah. And so they were worried that I would come in and then totally manipulate the interview and make them seem like some evil person, some hateful Nazi. And so what happened was I eventually got one guy on the phone, and I found out through him that a lot of these guys had created like Discord channels where they'd talk to each other because they were like, we're the trolls, and they would talk and communicate. And so they had a lot of contacts with each other. And so when I convinced one of the trolls to get on board, they were able to vouch for me and then introduce me to some other people and reach out. And there was a couple people that I wanted to get, some trolls even some trolls that I had got in contact with and spoke with, and they were like, you know what, I don't trust you, I'm not going to be in it. And but most of them I was able to win their trust enough to do an interview, and and I was able to get a good number of them, especially the well-known characters who were there, like Brittany Venti and Sam Hyde and Paperboy Prince and Plaidman. So.
No, it's great. And, you obviously do come at it from the perspective that, like, this is fundamentally funny, but I think some of the point of view that comes across in the documentary is because these are the people who would actually talk to you, was largely the trolls more so than others. I was kind of saying to Dan when we were talking about this, like, I bet, like, you did, I think you even say this in the documentary, if you did reach out, obviously Shia LaBeouf's probably busy, whatever, but, like, you reached out to Luke Turner's team, I believe, too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and he, like, refused. I mean, he could have probably given a different take, but...
Yeah. I was hoping for that different... I was hoping for... When I first started, because I knew these two groups were living in totally different realities. There was the one reality of the edgy college kids who, if you spend a considerable amount of time on 4chan, your humor just gets so insanely dark. And if it's incubated in that environment, people outside of that culture, they cannot relate. They cannot understand why you would think those things are funny or why you would say such edgy things. So they're incubated in this sort of really offensive humor, this really dark, nihilistic, edgy corner of the internet. And so they come up from that perspective with this really rude humor. And then the other people have been incubated in a world that's dictated by the media that tells them that there's, the greatest threat to America is Nazis. And then they go, oh, here's the Nazis we've been so worried about. And so I thought it would be interesting to have sort of two realities of the people involved juxtaposed against one another throughout the film. So you could see one reality where it's these kids having fun, and the other reality where it's these artists who felt like they were under attack by literal Nazis. But yeah, they didn't want to talk. Actually, Shia's team, I got very close to getting an interview with Shia.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
really?
That's
interesting.
So I was emailing back and forth with his management team. When I reached out initially at the beginning of the project, and they said, no, thank you. Shia's not doing press. He's been involved in a lot of controversies, as you probably know. But after the conversion, because I was still editing the film when his viral conversion story came out to Catholicism, and I thought, oh, this is so interesting. Let me reach out again. So I reached out again. I said, hey, to his management team, hey, I noticed Shia's had this conversion. I just want to let you know, one of the trolls in the story had a similar conversion, and maybe he'd be interested. And they said, oh yeah, that's really cool. We'll talk to Shia LaBeouf about it, and he might be interested in doing an interview. And I was like, wow, this is cool. I could be going to LA and interviewing Shia LaBeouf. And then they're like, he's going to want to see some of the film. He's going to want to see some of the film. And I said, okay. So I sent a few clips, and I didn't want it to be like a bait and switch. So I sent some of the introduction, some of the setup, and I sent some of the trolling as well. So they knew, there is a bit of poking fun at Shia. And then they came back and they're like, yeah, it's okay. Thanks for the... he doesn't want
it. Sounds like they were congenial, though, which is good.
They were, they were really cool
to hear. And I think we want to talk at the end maybe a little later because it's a good almost final note. But, that thing with him converting is this amazing... I know other people I've known who make documentaries always say, like, with a documentary, sometimes you have to, like, let the ending come to you, like, as it happens. Like, very often documentaries end in this way where it's like, 2 years later, and look. And yeah, what an incredible ending to this whole thing that event was.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll talk more about that that later, but...
sure.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things I'm thinking, like, it would be really difficult. Like, I understand his saying no, Shia, but it would be really difficult to do a documentary about this that doesn't portray things as they actually happened, which do, involve Shia having meltdowns.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, it's just simply like, I get that he would maybe not want to talk about that, but it wouldn't be an accurate documentary if you shied away from those subjects.
Yeah, true.
It's gonna say, like, I actually don't think especially with the ending as it is, that Shia necessarily comes across as that bad. I mean, I think there's this kind of element which you highlight where it's like almost as if it was kind of more, and I think either Nick or Sam says this, like, it was more Luke's idea that Shia was just kind of the face of it. So he seems like he's a bit of a victim of it in his own way too, and then with that,
exactly,
I didn't think less of Shia LaBeouf after seeing this. In fact, maybe I thought more.
Yeah, and I didn't want it to be. That was the impression that I got from the research, from talking to different people, and who knows what the exact truth is. It's hard to know. Some of these, like, especially, I'm sure we'll get into the Sam Hyde claims, but how much of that is true and all this. But definitely the impression from everyone was Shia was sort of being taken for a ride, and these relatively unknown, well, definitely unknown artists up until this collaboration with Shia, the sentiment from people was they were using him for the fame. He's got this Transformers fame, and they wanted to have, they had all these quirky ideas from their art school professors or whatever, and they have this weird art style that they invented, metamodernism and whatever.
Right.
And they've got now a celebrity to sort of blow up their cool art style.
Exactly. And there's no doubt that, like, Shia was really into the message, and that I know that he wanted to do performance art, so he found his way to them. It wasn't like they kidnapped him and brainwashed him, but no, there's definitely that, and frankly, another element that is just funny when you think about it in retrospect, element where it's this Luke Turner, which you almost portray almost as this evil genius in some of the animations behind things. I realize, there may be some people listening to this who are not as familiar with the whole affair, that He Will Not Divide Us thing. So maybe, I can do that. I won't make you rehash it. I can kind of offer my own explanation. Also a side note to that, once again, it's like this, even not only within mainstream circles, but even on like Frog Twitter and circles like that, this should be more talked about, I feel. It is kind of bracketed in history a little bit, where it's like, oh yeah, that was 2016. It's kind of overshadowed perhaps by, like, the actual Trump election, but man, it's really relevant. So I will again applaud your documentary for capturing it really well. But yes, to back up, we're dropping this name Luke Turner, as you kind of just explained. He's Australian too, right? Or maybe,
he's English.
He's English, but a performance artist, and a very sort of liberal performance artist who is into this concept of meta modernism. So it's all very, like, basically pretentious performance art. The He Will Not Divide Us installations, spearheaded, or Shia LaBeouf was the face of them. Initially it was at an art museum in Brooklyn, I believe.
Queens, yeah.
The Queens. The Museum of the Moving Image, and basically they were, shortly after Trump's inauguration, they had a live stream going 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, in which Shia LaBeouf and others would stand in front of it and just repeat, "He will not divide us. He will not divide us." over and over again. Again, not to rehash this for anyone who knows the story. I hope it's not too boring, but I just feel like there are some people who don't know.
Yeah.
What happened was 4chan stepped in, realized what an incredible opportunity this was for IRL trolling, and began to show up on the scene. You'll have to see the documentary, because that is really just the tip of the iceberg into the depths that this narrative goes. Things go insane. It involves Shia LaBeouf getting arrested multiple times, later having a mental breakdown. It involves the installation moving all across the country and all across the world, in fact, and always coming to the same kind of chaotic ending. It's all captured in dividers, but I just wanted to add that little explanation, I guess.
Yeah, and I think the element of the story that most people would probably know is the capture the flag. After 4chan stepped in and started trolling the hell out of Shire and the people there, they wanted to move the project and recreate the project in a format that couldn't be fucked with, essentially. And so they set up a flag. Instead of chanting in front of a live stream camera, they set up a flag in a hidden location to prevent it from being trolled. And the viral story was all these guys on 4chan doing this coordinated investigation, CSI level, CIA, NSA, Edward Snowden level investigation into, using weather patterns and stars and frog croaking noises and all this to track down where this flag was, what hidden location it was, so they could get on there and steal it. So that's the most incredible part of the story.
Absolutely, the most entertaining. Yeah, go on.
Truly amazing. I think Brittany Venti described it as many on our side do, weaponized autism, and it's amazing the kind of if you have people who are dedicated enough and have enough time on their hands, you could piece those things together, and it's an accomplishment, frankly.
It was 2 or 3 days that it took them.
It took less than 48 hours. I think it was 32 hours.
My God.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. They even factored in, this is funnily, they factored in a picture they'd found of that Shia LaBeouf had taken with a fan at a nearby diner. And then it involved someone driving around and honking, and people try to hear it on the live stream. Again, people are just going to have to see this to believe it. But yeah, maybe we could get a little bit of the Sam Hyde narrative in the documentary. Sam Hyde was one of the attendees, I guess, towards the end of the installation's time at the Museum of the Moving Image. Very memorable, I guess, mimetic event. This would have been, early 2017 after the inauguration, after $1 Million Extreme was canceled, and Sam Hyde was a bit of a folk hero, and he shows up on the scene same day as Fuentes, and they met, and it's this whole thing that's captured on the doc. But Sam Hyde offers a broader explanation of his involvement in the whole affair on the documentary, which is a little ambiguous as to if it's true or not, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I went to interview Sam Hyde for the documentary because he went down, and the impression was basically the trolling was just getting crazy, and it was like one-upsmanship. So the trolling started with a little bit of saying the wrong chant, going up to all the people chanting, saying the wrong thing, sort of being annoying, or shouting Pepe or some meme. And it got, eventually it was people would go down there and do a troll, an IRL troll, and then it would get posted on 4chan, and everyone would be like, wow, this guy's crazy, he's doing this. And people in the area, 4chan users in the area, trolls, they were like, well, I can do better than that. I can go down and people were coming. So there was people who drove 3 hours from neighboring cities just to go down there and add their troll to the mix. And they were going up to Shia LaBeouf and saying things like Hitler did nothing wrong, and doing all this crazy stuff. And because Sam Hyde was such a big character on 4chan at the time, everyone loved him on 4chan. They said, we got to meme this into existence, meme this into reality. Let's everyone DM Sam Hyde, everyone tweet at Sam Hyde and say, come down to the live stream. And he went down there was a lot of chaos. There was some Antifa people who went there to try and get in his face, and there was sort of fights broke out, not directly with Sam, but it was just a wild time. So I went to interview Sam Hyde about that. And when I interviewed him, he said, "Yeah, I didn't go down there spontaneously because of 4chan. I went down there because Shia's artist friends had asked me secretly to go down and stir up chaos." And his claim is that they were Shia's friends, without him knowing, were trying to encourage the trolling because it was so controversial. It was getting media attention. So they thought, "Ooh, let's secretly." This is Sam Hyde's claim, and again, we're not sure if this is true. Sam Hyde's a tricky guy. So he says he was paid by Shia's friends, artist friends, to go down there and cause a scene in order to drum up media attention around the project. And when he told me that, I just was it totally threw the whole interview out. I was totally taken off guard. I had no idea he was going to say that. Yeah, I believed him at the time, and sort of the spoiler is because he had a whole bunch of claims. He said he was going to the Venice Film Festival with Luke Turner, Shia's artist friend Luke Turner, and he knew him from the art circles. And it's plausible because Sam Hyde is a RISD grad. He's a RISD grad, yeah. So he's in this weird arts circles, and there was a lot of weird information that he had that even didn't get included in the documentary. Just the way that he was telling about it, these weird details that he had that aren't really details that you would bring up if you were making something up. And the timelines of his claims line up. Because I spent so much time trying to. A lot of what he claims is corroborated. You can corroborate it with other evidence. But it's like going to the film festival. That perfectly lines up with the timeline of Shia. That film festival happens right after Shia meets Luke for the first time, because you can find these stories from interviews online of Shia talking about how he met Luke, and it was right after that meeting. He was filming that tank movie, World War II movie Fury, in England, and he met with Luke, and then right after that meeting was the film festival, and so. This is when. So Sam Hyde's talking about how Luke is just getting connected with Shia. So it all sort of lines up, but I couldn't find any concrete. And then he comes out after the movie, the first release of the movie, and he comes out and says, whatever. I don't know if you saw this clip because it wasn't in the first version. It's in the current version of the film.
Yeah, you showed it to me. Yeah, you sent me the link. But yeah.
Yeah. So he says, the story. He was on some live stream. And someone asked him a question, and he says, "The story I told in that documentary, if you saw that documentary, the story I told in that documentary is fake." And so I don't know what he's referring to, because there's a lot. Obviously, he did go down there. That's evidence of that. And there were certain things that he claimed that were backed up by evidence. The whole ripping off Marina Abramovich is something that those artists have been criticized for by many different people. And so I don't know, he's a tricky guy.
Back. Yeah. That's just his type of humor. You never know what exactly is true, what exactly is sincere. Obviously, some element of it is a troll. Sam Hyde brings the trolling even to your project, but but hey, I mean, I think that although I certainly don't think that he was actually paid by Luke and the others. I don't believe that, but. There is there's a spiritual truth to it that and Fuentes and others kind of talk about this in the documentary, that in fact the trolling, Sam's and other people's, in many regards, I mean this sincerely, I don't mean it ironically, I actually do think added a much greater element of art to the project. Obviously from the perspective that 4chan was kind of funny in what it was doing, which is not a perspective Luke Turner and others would share, but nevertheless, if your goal is to say he will not divide us, and that's so much more interesting if you're saying it over a din of people who have other views. It did turn the whole thing into a much more interesting, because it is performance art, and what 4chan was doing is trolling is a kind of performance art even. So yeah, I think there is that truth to it. Yeah. That
is very interesting that you say that, because their whole brand, my understanding of, and I didn't go to some fancy art university in London to get taught about the whole philosophy behind their art, but my understanding of it is, and especially you can see this if you look at the previous examples of their work, is that the performance art is kind of like you set up a scenario where the art is spontaneously created with the interaction between the performance artist and either the art piece or random people like the public. And so, for example, he did that one, the I'm Not Famous Anymore one, where he sat in a room.
Oh yeah.
And people could come in and interact with him. It looks to me to be a total ripoff of Marina Abramovich's The Artist is Present. A ripoff of the Rhythm Zero and Artist is Present combined. So they set up the scenario, right? Shai is sitting in a room, at a table and chairs, and then people can come in and talk to him and say something. And the art itself is the interaction. That's what the art is.
Yeah.
And so all the work that they've done, so when they set up the live stream camera, they say, we're going to have a live stream and chant "He will not divide us," and encourage people, to spontaneously participate in the creation of the art. And then the people come up, random people come and they chant "He will not divide us," and the way that they interact in this spontaneous way is creating art, And then the trolls come up and they want to participate. And I really think that this was a betrayal of their own philosophy, because as artists, they should have, if they were really dedicated to that philosophy of art, they should have accepted the trolling as part of the art. We're creating this scenario, and whatever happens, whatever is spontaneously generated, is itself the performance art, and that's whatever may come, and so the trolling happened, and I just think I think at the beginning, and you can see through some of these tweets, I think they've been deleted now, but you can see old screenshots of tweets from Luke Turner where he's really it seems like, based on the tweets during the early trolling when it wasn't so intense, he was kind of like, oh, this is cool, this is part of the art creation. And then as it got more intense and more political, I think they changed their tune and they said, this is being hijacked. And so then they started putting their own ideology into it and said, no, this is, we're framing the whole thing.
Yeah.
Outside of our original philosophy into, this political agenda and this political fight. So they betrayed their own philosophy in that way.
That being said, I think the trolls really did save this project to the extent like it had an artistic aim or an artistic goal to begin with. They helped it achieve that goal, because without them, it's just the repetition of this kind of saccharine statement over and over. And they brought this kind of drama, this kind of contention, and that actually, elevated it to something that we're talking about right now. Like if there were never any trolling, there would be no Dividers documentary. We wouldn't be talking about this right now.
Exactly.
It would just be another kind of like performance art thing that
literally no one cares.
No one cares about. It wasn't very inspired. It didn't really do anything. And like if anything, like I think the artists here are like the mustache trolling dude, or the milkman.
I think. And some of the trolls have speculated, like some of the trolls are deep diving into the whole conspiracy, and they think that Luke Turner is pretending to be upset about how the whole thing went. And because, here's an interesting thing. When they moved it and turned it into a flag, what does that what does that sort of subconsciously trigger in you? There's a flag.
Exactly.
You want to go and screw this whole thing up, and now they go, no, we're going to hide a flag. And people say, some of these trolls have suggested that you're hiding a flag somewhere. It's subconsciously triggering like memories of like the Capture the Flag, that game that we all played in high school. And so some people think this was a deliberate attempt to encourage a sort of a viral story or a viral hunt for a Capture the Flag game. And if that is true, I think that's really genius. If they were self-consciously doing that, that's genius of Luke and Nastya.
Sam too at that rate.
Yeah, maybe they did.
I mean, I don't know anything about Luke Turner beside what is in your documentary, but if he is a real artist, I don't see how he can sit back and think anything other than this was a success beyond my wildest imagination. That like everything that happened was, that was added to the art, that made the art.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree.
Like I would imagine he must be pleased by this, as you suggested in the documentary, perhaps.
Yeah, well, I guess we'll never know. He didn't want to be interviewed, so I guess we'll never know.
Yeah.
Shadowy mastermind.
Yeah.
Well, as we kind of talked about earlier, Fuentes highlights this, and I don't think it's just a Fuentes thing. I think others would as well. That this was really the climax, the apogee of the meme war. Again, I think it gets a little overshadowed by Trump's actual election, which is also sort of credited to 4chan in all these ways. But I do think it's but more so than the election, which was just sort of influenced by certain, memes and whatnot. A few other things could really show just what 4chan was capable of at the time. I think Fuentes even compares it to Arab Spring in a way. With justification, it's these things that the ways the culture and politically things could be affected just by people behind the computer. I mean, it's an amazing showcase of that. What's sort of, in my opinion, sad is that this was a different era. I think Fuentes even describes it as like this was before the empire. They cracked down pretty hard. They cracked down on 4chan, but not just 4chan, also Twitter, almost any social media platform, and also just what you can kind of say in public. Nothing. I think it's fair to say that pretty much nothing like this. Well, I don't want to be too pessimistic, but nothing like this would really happen now. There'd be some. I mean, even as I'm saying this now, it's like I suppose it still could, but they've made it a lot harder. Here I'm using the they thing, and not by like you were talking about earlier with talking about they made a documentary. Who is they? The powers that be, shall we say? But yeah, I mean, if you could, I know you're just a documentarian. You capture this stuff, but I don't know if you want to comment on kind of how this internet and this internet culture and the effects it can and can't have, how that's changed over the past 5 or 6 years through COVID, et cetera.
Yeah, it's really interesting to think because what I'm fascinated about is the spirit of like the spirit in which propelled this trolling. What was sort of the mindset and the impulse to go ahead and just ruin this art project. And they talk a little bit about that. I tried to get into a little bit of the mindset of 4chan for people who are familiar with it. And one of the trolls, Plaidman, he said it really well. It was, I think he put it perfectly. He came up with this term, transgressive nihilism. And I think that's sort of what propelled the Trump election, and that's what propelled this project, because I think it seems to be like something to pay attention to when young people are totally disenfranchised with the whole system. I feel like that was the same spirit behind the let's meme Trump into the White House, because
absolutely. Yeah.
I think a lot of the guys on 4chan came to really like Trump in a genuine sense, but there was, from my understanding, there was this let's meme Trump into the presidency. He's a meme. He's a he's like a bombastic sort of, this clown type. He's almost like a...
Yeah, he is a meme, yeah.
And so if you have... I think the spirit was like, okay, we're totally disenfranchised with the political system. We see the political system as a joke. And so what would be funny, if you totally don't take it seriously, get a clown into the White House. We want to have, it's like a protest vote. We don't take any of this seriously, so we want Trump to be in there. And I think there was, when Kanye West ran for president in 2020, that was the same thing. I remember seeing celebrities coming out and saying, if you think it's funny to vote for Kanye West for president, you better not vote for him in 2020 because it's like the celebrity class is trying to keep the sanctity of the institution of the election alive, and these trolls are just totally don't they totally disrespect and don't have any sort of treat it with any sort of sanctity. And I think it's the same with the He Will Not Divide Us, because there's this somber art project where you say this like almost like a prayer. It kind of had these like religious elements, and people were taking it very seriously, and this is like a sacred thing. And it was the same energy. We totally don't hold it. Nothing is sacred. We're going to go and ruin it. And I think people have talked about 4chan sort of being done after this, and you go on 4chan and people are just saying, like, every post, people are just commenting fed. It's all like shills and feds on 4chan now. But I think the spirit has moved sort of to manifest itself in different areas. Like, I think the Wall Street bets is the same thing with the GameStop short squeeze, and people are saying, why don't you don't respect the sanctity of the institution of the stock market. You're just buying this stock, this worthless stock, because you think it's funny that everything's going to crash to the ground. Don't you know what you're doing? You're destroying the system. And it's this transgressive nihilism. Yeah, that's what we want to do. People were putting their savings, their life savings, into this stock that they knew they would lose it all because they were totally disenfranchised. And so that, I think, is after 4chan sort of had its moment in the sun, and the as Nick Fuentes would say, the empires come in and shut it all down. It just moved. That's that feeling, that spirit of totally disenfranchisement with the system is still out there, and I think it's going to happen again. The people were worried that the whole GameStop short squeeze would destroy the stock market. Yeah, so I think there's a few examples that's coming. I think people need to pay attention to that, because the more that you have young people who don't want to grow up and graduate and be part of this system, but they're instead totally cynical about everything, and they want to tear it down. It's kind of like what you said with Arab Spring. You allow the format for these people to coordinate, to chat, to talk with each other, and be like, oh, you're disenfranchised? Me too. But, let's tear it all down.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of putting it. Transgressive nihilism is definitely a good term for it. In that book Dan mentioned earlier, Kill All Normies by Angela Nagel, that's definitely how she kind of understood 4chan as well. And I mean, it gets bracketed in this right-wing, left-wing way, but really, more fundamentally, it is about that transgressive nihilistic energy that I think righteous and sympathetic in many cases, disillusionment with the system and the desire to strike against it, but strike against it with humor, which is, for the most part, I mean, humor. And then in the case of Wall Street bets, like, yeah, obviously there's some economic shenanigans, but like, it's not, these aren't terrorists, but they're nevertheless spoken of as if they are. I mean, I really think I could go down rabbit hole with, I could go down an angle of talking about this. Like, I mean, I never thought I'd look back on 2016, 2017 as an innocent era. But compared to the stuff during the pandemic and now, at least on the 4chan front, it almost was. I mean, there was a lot of humor to it. I think that transgressive nihilism there's a darkness to that, because it's a darkness that a lot of people feel. But, this is, as we said at the get-go, this was mostly just a funny story.
Yeah. And I think, I agree with you. It's funny to think of 2016, 2017 as a more innocent time. And I think more people are starting to, what you say, it's jokes, it's humor, but you hear all these stories of, very aggressive governments, very authoritarian governments. One of the things that they really like to censor is humor, because you can't make, you have to control if you can't control the sanctity of the system, and everyone treats it as a joke, that's like the beginning of the end for the system. And so you have like, who's the president of China? He banned Winnie the Pooh because people were saying he looked like Winnie the Pooh. So it was making all the people making Winnie the Pooh memes about him. So they banned that. You can't have humor, because humor is the beginning of, you laugh at something that doesn't make sense. You laugh at something that you don't respect, that you don't take seriously. And you can't have people laughing at the system if you're in charge, because people got to take it seriously.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, laughing is the one thing where, like, even if you have more power, even if you're like, I can beat you up or whatever, if the person is laughing at you, in some sense, he's won. In some sense, you can't take that back. You can't take back that laugh. So it's very dangerous.
And simply the act of not taking something seriously is very dangerous, I think, to the powers that be. And partially because they have a hard time reacting to it without looking insane. It's like, why are you giving this much blowback to someone who's just kind of laughing at you? I do think it genuinely undermines them, but it's hard. At the end of the day, you can say it's all for the lulz, man. It's because he's kind of as people always did with Pepe memes and whatnot. Yeah. There's always that convenient thing you can fall back on. So it's a very powerful weapon. I do think it's been significantly degraded because I think powers that be sort of caught on to how it can be deflected and how we have to, pretend that this is all hate speech and like crack down. It's been cracked down upon, no doubt. But as you say, I do think it's kind of found different avenues. Yeah,
and I think this is kind of a cliche quote that maybe has been beaten to death, but it's worth mentioning. I think I think it's a George Orwell quote, and he said, "Inside every joke is a tiny revolution," and absolutely. I think that's so true. Yeah.
On that note, or you want to go on to answer?
I was going to say, what do you think about that? They've been characterized, the quote-unquote trolls, as transgressive nihilists. But what do you think about the idea that they are truth tellers? And so you have this, he will not divide us thing, which is just like, regardless of like where you stand on the political spectrum, it's just like some saccharine kind of silly thing. And so they, kind of, and I think something that's interesting among the trolls, if that's what we're going to call them, they're a varied group. They're not all, one, they're not all MAGA types. They're not all, internet autists or whatever. They, they're not all in one political camp. And they nevertheless are united by pointing out that this is nonsense, that this thing that they're doing is silly. And to me, like when I see that, I don't really see nihilism so much as a desire to kind of like speak truth to power. Yeah. And and kind of like almost in some ways the opposite of nihilism. To say like things, the truth does matter, and this is nonsense, and we have to, alert you to the fact that this is very silly.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I don't think all of these guys are totally nihilistic, but I think you do get a good sense of the nihilist element to it from the Alex Lemoya film we mentioned before, before the show, TFW No GF. That I think is much more focused on the transgressive, at least the nihilistic element. I think that the TFW No GF, I think, brings a good point that maybe we should have sympathies for some of these guys, because like, what do? I don't know, like, I don't know about you guys, but I didn't come from a rich family, and I didn't go to a good school, and these guys graduating high school, what do you tell someone? Yeah. You know, an 18-year-old kid who's graduating high school, they look at the debt, they look at the political agendas that are becoming more and more tightening on what you can say and what you can do, and the social and cultural battles in the United States that are spilling out into the different riots, different demonstrations, Black Lives Matter, the January 6th. You're seeing things starting to crumble, and you hear someone say, hey, don't worry, just go into the nearest whatever company, give them a good firm handshake, and show up on time, and you're going to have a job, and you're going to be able to have a family, and you're going to be able to have a house. That sort of American dream facade is kind of crumbling, and people are, a lot of these guys, especially when you go on 4chan, because 4chan is very much showing unfiltered, like, the horrors of the world. And you have like what's mentioned in the documentary, the largest killers of Americans is now drug overdoses and suicide, and you look at that, and then you go, I'm never going to be able to own a home. There's all with. If you're following the culture war stuff, relationships between the sexes are becoming more and more like strained, and so, you may not have if you don't have a good job, you may not be able to find a wife and get married, and the reality starts to set in pretty early. And if all you have is you're young and all you have is potential ahead of you, you've got your whole life ahead of you, and you're looking at your options, it's looking pretty bleak. So what do you do with that? That you got all this energy, and I think it just impulsively comes out as this, trying to speak truth to power, like you said, Dan. I think that's part of it. Like, hey, this is all broken, but I think there's some sort of impulse to humor that when things are, it's like that whole thing, when things are so bad, all you can do is laugh. I think there's something of that element coming into it.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I mean, like, the political situation in America today for, young men is, as we've discussed on this pod many times, a very difficult roads ahead, shall we say.
Yeah.
And, so, like, that type of situation breeds, frankly, like, a lot of creativity, a lot of humor, a lot of, like, the very fact that, like, our writing and, other stuff has been kind of, like, shunted aside to the shadows. Well, like, that's actually, like, better for the art in some respects, because you, like, collaborate with each other, you, like, are not constrained by market incentives. And so, like, I mean, I'm sure you would in part agree that some of, like, the best culture of the past 10 years came out from weirdos on the internet.
Yeah, I totally agree. And you hear, like, a lot of these people with, like, really interesting takes, really weird, like, anything unusual, anything out of the box, anything like unique and interesting. So much of it has just been, like, taken out of the mainstream, like off of Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, where you would find this stuff. And I find, like, you go on these platforms and you just see the same stuff over and over and over and over. It's like the same content just repackaged over and over. And to get anything, you have to go outside to get any sort of weird, unusual takes. So
but
totally
also
agree.
The memorable takes, right?
Yeah.
Like, those are the ones that people, like, I'm just thinking right now, like, who remembers, like, any advertising slogan from the past 4 or 5 years? But everyone knows Yes Chad. Everyone knows, the Virgin versus the Chad.
Yeah.
Everyone knows, like, all of these memes. Everyone knows Pepe and Apu. So,
yes.
Like,
that's such a good point. And the NPC one, I think, is a great example. Remember that NPC? And they started. What did they do? They would. It was the journalists. They would just post, like, NPC an image of the NPC meme under all these journalists on Twitter, and they were like, "We're being harassed and dehumanized."
They'd be angry.
And people were getting banned for making fun of the journalists for being NPCs. So you're so right. All the funny stuff, all the anything that goes against the mainstream, and I think it's a good point to mention, like these guys, like. The people who are totally disenfranchised with the system on 4chan, they're like, some of them are like, they're like tankies, some of the trolls I interviewed were tankies, these hardcore communists who said, we need a system, the solution is communism. Some people say the solution is MAGA, or the solution is like a Christian monarchy, or, all these out there very extreme changes that are needed. But the thing that unites them all is their disillusionment and hatred of the current system. So it's interesting, the diversity amongst the dissidents.
Oh, no, sincerely. I mean, you see that in your documentary and in others. There is a real diversity of opinion. And again, they're not even all white guys. It's not.
Totally,
yeah. To hit one last current events talking point, Ricky Vaughn. Doug, we'll call him, as Bronze Age Pervert does, we'll call him by his Twitter name. Ricky Vaughn this week in America, indicted for making a meme, basically, facing up to 10 years. You heard about this story, right?
Yeah, I was thinking about that.
Convicted, sorry, yes.
Yeah.
So I guess that kind of ties into what we've already talked about, but there is this crackdown against it, but as bad as that is, I guess I can use this talking point to express my own optimism. I don't think a lot of people are going to go in for this. I think that there is a lot of power that the sort of mainstream media, shall we say, has with regard to issues like this. But I don't know. Person on the street, we saw this a little bit with like the Rittenhouse case in a different way. I think that more just run-of-the-mill, definitely normie conservatives, but also just even just open-minded, understanding, reasonable liberals out there will realize that this is draconian, and hopefully realize what it represents. Also, I'm not Dan, you may know more about this than me, but this, what's it called? My friend Robert Starr called it like the Patriot Act of the internet.
Oh, the Restrict Act.
The Restrict Act. I don't know if you know about this, but there's this whole thing about TikTok in the United States right now potentially getting banned. Cracking down a lot of people dislike TikTok, but there's this notion that they maybe are slipping some other insidious things in with that legislation that will give the government sort of more control over social media. Or Dan, you may know a little bit about it than me.
I haven't read a ton about it yet, and I know there's a lot of people in our spaces talking about it, but from what I can gather, it's exactly that. It's a bill that is supposedly in response to TikTok's, possible, nefarious, aim or agenda of the Chinese government, but they've slipped in language that would give the government the ability to, a broad censorship abilities in connection with the internet. So, a good way to think of it would be, Elon bought Twitter. Well, if the government passes this, it doesn't matter because they can just step in and tell Twitter what to do.
Yeah, no, there's definitely some bad stuff like this sort of in the ether, as it were, with regard to the way things are being cracked down upon. And of course, Trump himself was indicted this week. So, glass is half empty, glass is half full. I think the way that some people could look at it would be, obviously it's bad that there's this crackdown, but at the same time it proves that there is still a lot of power in memes, in making memes, in being, the former comedian-in-chief, as Trump is. There is still a lot of fear of that, I think, coming from the establishment or whatever you want to call it. So
I think it's
bad. Go on. Yeah.
It's I agree with you. I think most people aren't totally clued in. I think most people aren't that political. I don't know about America. America's a very politically volatile place. But I feel like you talk to most people on the street and they're reasonable. My concern is that it doesn't really seem to matter what most people on the street are interested in. It seems like there are certain classes of people that whatever their opinion tends to be how the whole conversation is shaped. So if you have everyone who works in the media, and everyone who works in making movies, making documentaries, everyone who's tells the stories, makes the movies, makes the music, if they're all on the same page politically, that's a fraction, a tiny fraction of the population, but they control the entire conversation. And so we know the Silicon Valley political leanings of the Silicon Valley companies, all the people who work in media. And so as long as that remains the same, there's very little hope. The one thing that I think what is hopeful is that the Dutch farmers had the protest. They were passing that incredibly restrictive agricultural bill, and the Dutch farmers all protest. And then they recently won a bunch of seats in Parliament, and they've got that political party. They started the Dutch Farmers Party, and that is just huge. I didn't even expect that to go through, but you don't have, because all these avenues of communication, the mainstream media and social media, are all controlled by people with the same political views. You don't have very much. Like the average person or someone who's against that doesn't have very much recourse. And you see eventually things spill out, and you saw that in the He Will Not Divide Us. You saw that with the Trump election. I think you see that with the truckers, the truckers in Canada. Yeah. You're not allowed to talk about any of this stuff. You're not allowed to disagree with the government on any social media platform. The only time it gets big is like when people show up in person physically, because and that was sort of controversial. Within Canada, it was because they were demonized in the same way that the Dutch farmers were demonized and everything. You can control people's opinion of those movements by controlling the media. So I'm not as hopeful as you are, Matt, but
I'm just trying to be a little optimistic.
Yeah. It is I'm happy to be, because now they'll say, hey, did you hear they made a documentary about He Will Not Divide Us, and finally I get to be the they, and I get to have a little bit of influence over a small story that hopefully is coming from someone who's outside of this totally controlled these controlled institutions that are ideologically controlled. So hopefully we see more stories coming from outside.
Hopefully we do, and I still think, to reiterate a point from earlier, that this documentary, even if it's on a somewhat alternative platform right now, Movie Plus, it's also on Amazon and hopefully soon iTunes. I still think it crossover, because I still think it presents things in a way that goes down easily, no matter what your persuasion is, and I have a lot of hope for things like that sort of changing the conversation a bit.
I think that's the way to do it.
Are you working on anything else? I mean, it's okay if not, or if there's nothing that you'd really want to pitch at this point. But before I wrap up, I definitely wanted to ask.
Well,
work or anything else that's going on with Dividers you want to sort of pitch.
Well, not a whole lot. Hopefully, it gets out on iTunes and Google Play, and hopefully some more people get to see it, because it's really hard when you're not from the institutions to get the word out. So that's what's happening at the moment. But in terms of another project, I'd love to do something similar on the Wall Street Bets GameStop short squeeze, because Netflix made a documentary about that. I don't know if you saw that. It came out. I heard
about it.
It came out at the end of last year, and I remember watching it just thinking, this is so. It's like if BuzzFeed. Personality of BuzzFeed created a documentary, and it's very, tame, and all the people they interview are journalists from mainstream media platforms, and all the and I just thought this is an outsider story. This is, I don't think they captured really the spirit of it, and so I would like to do a documentary about Wall Street bets and make it better than the Netflix one. So that's I haven't started anything, but that's a dream that would be great to do something like that in the next year or so.
See it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's so many like interesting personalities that were caught up in that. Like there's really fertile ground, I think.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, Dan, unless you have any other questions for me.
No. Just, thank you again for coming on, Josiah. And
thank you for
making the Dividers.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah. On both.
You're welcome,
documentary.
Guys.
All right. Have a great rest of your Monday, and we will enjoy the remainder of our Sunday.
Yeah, will do.